Hello, my friends. Tonight, we delve into the realm of the werewolf, where neighbors transform into nightmares, and the American dream twists into a waking hell. Imagine waking to find your loved ones torn apart, their entrails decorating your once peaceful home. Picture yourself pinned beneath a beast with glowing eyes, its fetid breath washing over you as it prepares to feast. Picture yourself alone in dark woods, pursued by a hulking monstrosity that was once your trusted partner. 8 tails of blood, tooth and claw that will make you fear the full moon's glow. So lock your doors, check the moon, and ask yourself, when the howls pierce the night, will you be predator or prey? Story 1. The howls came again last night, echoing through the quiet streets of our suburban neighborhood. Closer this time, more insistent, as if the beast were right outside our door, baying for our blood. I lay in bed, my wife trembling beside me, our children whimpering in their rooms down the hall. We had moved here to escape the city, to find peace and safety in the idyllic suburbs. But now, a new terror had found us, and there was nowhere left to run. It had started 3 months ago, the first time we heard the howls. Distant at first, barely audible over the rustling of leaves in the night wind. But each month, they grew closer, louder, more hungry. I had called the police, the animal control, anyone who would listen. But they all said the same thing: there were no wolves in this area, hadn't been for decades. They suggested coyotes, feral dogs, but I knew the truth. I had seen the footprints in the mud, the claw marks on the trees. These were no ordinary animals. Last night I decided to confront the beasts, to protect my family no matter the cost. I loaded my gun, kissed my wife goodbye, and stepped out into the darkness. The streets were empty, the houses dark and silent. The only sound was the pounding of my own heart, the rasp of my breath in the still air. I walked towards the woods at the edge of the neighborhood, following the sound of the howls. As I reached the tree line, I saw them, eyes glowing in the darkness, massive shapes moving between the trunks. They emerged from the shadows like nightmares given form, their fur matted with blood, their teeth gleaming in the moonlight. I raised my gun, my hands shaking. But before I could fire, they were upon me. Claws like knives raked across my chest, sending me stumbling back. Teeth clamped down on my arm, crushing bone, tearing flesh. I screamed, the sound lost in the snarls of the beasts. I fell to the ground, my blood soaking the earth. They tore at me, ripping chunks of meat from my body, gulping them down with savage hunger. I felt my intestines spill out, my ribs crack under the onslaught. Through the haze of agony, I saw one of the creatures rear up, its form shifting, changing. Fur receded, bones cracked and reformed. And then standing over me was my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, who had welcomed us to the neighborhood with a smile and a plate of cookies. But his smile now was a grotesque leer, his teeth stained with my blood. "Welcome to the pack," he growled, his voice guttural, inhuman. I tried to scream, but all that came out was a wet gurgle. My lungs were filling with blood, my heart stuttering in my shattered chest. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was the beasts, the people I had called my neighbors, my friends, turning towards my house, towards my family. And as my life drained away, as the monsters began their feast, I knew that my sacrifice had been in vain, that the horror that had come to our quiet suburb would not be satisfied with just one victim. The howls echoed through the night, a triumphant chorus of hunger and death, and in my fading mind I saw the future that awaited this place. Streets running red with blood, houses transformed into charnel pits, a neighborhood of nightmares where the American dream had become a waking hell. And at the center of it all, the beasts, the werewolves, our neighbors, our friends, transformed into monsters by the curse that had infected this land. As my vision faded, as the last spark of life guttered out in my ruined body, I heard them howling, calling to their kin, to the packs that lurked in the shadows of every suburb, every city. The invasion had begun, and God help us all. I hovered at the edge of death, a ravaged lump of meat barely clinging to life. Through the red haze of agony, I witnessed the horror unfold. The beasts stormed towards my house, throwing back their heads to bay at the uncaring moon. The largest crashed through the front door, the others pouring in behind it, eyes aflame with predatory hunger. I heard the screams of my family, the gunshots as my wife desperately tried to hold the monsters back. But the sounds were drowned out by inhuman howls, followed by wet, visceral tearing. My neighbor, my friend, emerged from the ruins of my home, blood dripping from his elongated jaws, soaking through the familiar sweater he always wore. In his arms, the broken body of my wife, her sightless eyes staring into oblivion. The beast buried its muzzle in her belly, gulping down ropey intestines even as she twitched and spasmed. My vision went white, mind recoiling from the horror, but I could not retreat into death's solace. Not yet. More of the creatures slunk from the house, their muscular flanks streaked with gore, fragments of flesh caught between their teeth. They had no interest in hiding their identities anymore. I recognized them all beneath the blood and contorted bone, the friendly local barista, the cheerful secretary from my wife's office, lives in skins shed without a second thought. Behind them, flames began to lick at the walls of my home as the fire spread. The beasts raised their snouts to the sky, howling in victory through mouths full of human meat. Answering calls echoed back from all across the subdivision. The cul-de-sac had become a slaughter yard, the manicured lawns now soaked with blood and bile. More monsters converged, a seething tide of fur, fangs, and death. They flowed between the ravaged houses, dragging fresh kills to pile before their alpha. My neighbor, the kindly grandfather I'd known now fully transformed into a hulking horror, towered over the offerings. It seemed to swell larger with each sacrifice, until it dominated the street like a twisted idol. Blood fountained from the fountain in its yard, the cherubic statue at the center replaced by a severed head on a pike. My wife's head. I wanted to scream, to tear my eyes from the abyssal horror. But my body was already growing cold, nerves shutting down. All I could do was watch as the beasts initiated an orgy of cannibalistic debauchery upon the lawn I had once watered and mowed every Saturday morning. This had been my American dream, the perfect neighborhood, friendly faces, backyard cookouts, and block parties. Now it had mutated into a charnel pit of primal chaos, a suburban nightmare come to life. Story 2. Floorboards creaked under my feet as I checked the window locks for the third time tonight. The wind howled outside, rattling the old farmhouse to its foundations. The weather report said the worst storm in years. I hoped we'd make it through the night. My niece Shelley huddled on the sofa, peering around with wide eyes. "Is it the Wolfman? Aunt Nikki?" she asked in a small voice. "Like on TV?" I ruffled her hair, managing a tense smile. "No, sweetie, just a regular wolf. We're safe inside." I hoped that was true. Shelley was here because her parents were on vacation. They didn't know about my past, about the addiction, the recovery meetings and long road toward redemption. Shelley was my chance to prove myself responsible again. I wouldn't fail her. Not even with a monster lurking outside. We'd found the first mutilated deer carcass yesterday, just yards from the house. Trails of gore led into the forest. Wolves were rare here, but not unheard of. Still, something about the savagery disturbed me, set my nerves on edge. The storm slammed the house again. Shelley whimpered as the lights flickered. My hands shook, an old craving stirring. No, I had to stay sharp. For her. Outside, the wind dropped suddenly. An eerie silence descended, broken only by a soft scraping at the back door, nails dragging lightly over wood. My breath caught. Just old boards settling in the storm. Had to be. I saw something move outside the window. A shadow against the darkness, visible only for an instant before disappearing into the night. Something that ran on all fours. The wolves didn't get that big. Shelley screamed. I spun to see her pointing at the window by the sofa. The glass was spider-webbed with cracks. Smears of blood streaked the outside. My heart stuttered. Someone's sick idea of a joke. Some twisted kids from town trying to scare us? Please, God, let that be all this was. A deafening roar exploded just outside. Shelley wailed, sobbing in terror as the fiend slammed against the walls. It sounded impossibly huge, more beast than man. My mind reeled, unable to accept what was happening. With a crash, the living room window shattered inward. Glass sprayed across the hardwood. The wind howled through the jagged gap like the shrieking of the damned. A hulking shape shoved through the window frame. Crouched on all fours, its shoulders nearly grazed the ceiling. Matted fur covered corded muscle. Curved claws clacked against the floor, each paw large enough to crush a skull. Hot breath steamed from jaws full of glistening fangs longer than my fingers. But its eyes were the worst. Bloodshot orbs burning with frenzied hunger and intelligence that knew no natural beast. They fixed on Shelley, savoring her terror. Slaver dripped from its jaws. The wolfman tensed, ready to pounce, to rend her tender flesh, to feast. No, I screamed. I flung myself between them without hesitation, brandishing the fireplace poker. No thoughts of myself, only Shelley. The monster roared, fangs gleaming in a nightmare grin. It knew I posed no real threat. It would rip me apart all the same. Shelley fled screaming as the beast charged. I braced helplessly, poker raised in defiance. Those savage eyes filled my vision, promising horrors I could scarcely fathom. I prayed my death would buy her time to hide, time for morning light to banish this demon back to hell. Its fetid breath washed over me as it lunged. In my last instant, I swung with all my feeble strength. And the lights went out. Story 3. The redwoods loomed like ancient sentinels, their branches seeming to drink in the fading light. I adjusted my hat, peering into the lengthening shadows with a growing sense of unease. 30 years as a ranger, and I'd never seen anything like the scenes of carnage that had greeted me this past week. Campsites ravaged, tents shredded, the ground churned up and soaked with blood, but no bodies. Whatever did this took the remains with it. The higher-ups were calling it a rogue bear, but I knew these woods, knew every creature that called them home. This was something different, something that didn't belong. I thought of my partner, Bill. We'd found what was left of him 2 days ago, torn apart so viciously we could barely identify the remains. He'd been investigating strange reports of stone ruins deep in the forest. An altar of some kind, he'd said. Probably just the ravings of some unhinged hiker, I'd told him. Now I wished to God I'd gone with him. The shadows grew longer as I trekked deeper into the trees, following the trail of destruction. Broken branches, gashes in the tree trunks, and blood. So much blood. Night fell quickly under the dense canopy. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam seeming pitifully small against the oppressive darkness. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me flinch. I froze when I heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the forest floor and up my spine. The sound of a predator, a big one. Slowly I turned. The beam of my flashlight caught a pair of eyes glowing in the underbrush. Eyes far too large to belong to any bear. The beast emerged from the shadows, and my blood turned to ice in my veins. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall on its hind legs. Thick, matted fur covered a body rippling with unnatural musculature. And the teeth, God, the teeth. Yellowed fangs as long as my fingers, dripping with saliva. It watched me with a terrible intelligence in those glowing eyes. There was something disturbingly human about the way it cocked its head, studying me, as if it knew me, as if it had been waiting. I fumbled for my radio with shaking hands, never taking my eyes off the creature. "Dispatch, this is Hank. I've got a situation out here. Requesting immediate backup." Static. The creature took a step forward, lips peeling back in a snarl. "Dispatch, do you copy?" "I need..." The beast lunged, a blur of fur and fangs. I barely had time to raise my arm in a futile attempt to shield myself before it slammed into me, sending us both crashing to the forest floor. Claws like knives raked across my chest, drawing a scream from my lips. Hot, fetid breath washed over my face as it pinned me down, jaws snapping inches from my throat. I groped desperately for my sidearm, fingers closing around the grip. I jammed the barrel against the creature's ribs and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening, the muzzle flash blinding in the darkness. The beast jerked back with a yelp of pain, and I scrambled out from under it, adrenaline surging through my veins. But the creature was far from done. It whirled on me, blood matting the fur of its chest. Those burning eyes fixed on me with a hatred that chilled my soul. I turned and ran, crashing blindly through the underbrush. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to send me sprawling. But I didn't dare slow down. I could hear the beast crashing through the foliage behind me, gaining ground with every passing second. I burst into a clearing and stumbled to a halt, my heart seizing in my chest. There, in the center of the glade, stood the altar Bill had spoken of. Ancient stone, stained dark with what could only be blood. Bones littered the ground around it, some of them disturbingly human in shape. A guttural growl behind me. I spun, raising my gun with trembling hands. The beast stalked out of the trees, lips peeled back over blood-stained fangs. It moved with a predator's grace, muscles rippling beneath its matted fur. I fired, the shots echoing through the night. But the creature barely flinched, the bullets seeming to bounce off its hide like rain. It lunged, a mass of fur and fury, and I felt its claws sink into my shoulder, throwing me to the ground. The gun skittered away across the blood-soaked earth. I scrabbled for it desperately, fingers clawing at the dirt. But the beast was on me in an instant, its weight crushing the air from my lungs. I stared up into those glowing eyes, seeing my death reflected in their feral depths. The creature's jaws opened wide, hot drool spattering my face. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But the killing blow never came. Instead, the beast's weight lifted from my chest. I opened my eyes to see it padding toward the altar, its movements almost reverent. Slowly, I pushed myself to my feet, clutching my bleeding shoulder. The creature stood before the ancient stone, head bowed as if in prayer. And then, to my horror, it began to change. Fur receded, bones cracked and reformed. The beast's shape twisted and contorted, until a man stood in its place. A man I recognized even through the blood and grime. "Bill?" My voice was a hoarse whisper of disbelief. He turned to face me, and I recoiled at the sight of his eyes. They still held that same feral glow, that same predatory hunger. He grinned, revealing teeth still stained with my blood. "Hey there, partner." His voice was a guttural rasp, barely human. "Glad you could make it to the party." I shook my head, trying to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before me. What happened to you?" Bill laughed, a sound that sent chills skittering down my spine. "I found the truth, Hank. The truth that's been waiting out here in these woods for centuries, waiting for someone worthy to claim it." He gestured to the altar, to the bones scattered at its base. "This is where it happens, where the beast is born, where man and monster become one." I took a step back, my mind reeling. "You're insane. This isn't possible." "Oh, it's possible." Bill's grin widened. "And it's glorious. The power, Hank. You can't imagine the power." He took a step toward me, his eyes blazing with a mad fervor. "Join me. Embrace the beast within. Together we can rule these woods. We can feast on the flesh of the weak, just as nature intended." I shook my head, horror and revulsion rising in my throat. "You're a monster, Bill. I won't be a part of this madness." His face twisted into a snarl. "Then you'll die like all the rest, weak, unworthy." He lunged, his body already beginning to twist and change. I dove for my gun, fingers closing around the grip just as the beast that had been my friend slammed into me. We rolled across the blood-soaked ground, a tangle of fur and flesh. I felt its claws rake across my chest, its teeth snap at my throat. But I jammed the gun against its ribs and pulled the trigger, again and again until the chambers clicked empty. The beast that was Bill jerked and convulsed, a howl of agony tearing from its throat. It collapsed on top of me, its blood mingling with my own. I lay there beneath its weight, gasping for breath. The night seemed to close in around me, the ancient trees looming like silent witnesses to the horror that had unfolded. In the distance, I heard a howl, then another and another, answering the call of their fallen leader, coming to claim me. I closed my eyes, a bitter laugh bubbling up from my chest. 30 years in these woods, and this was how it ended. Torn apart by the very things I'd sworn to protect the forest from. As the howls grew closer, I summoned the last of my strength and pushed Bill's lifeless body off me. I staggered to my feet, clutching my wounds, and lurched toward the altar. If I was going to die tonight, it wouldn't be as prey. It wouldn't be on my knees, begging for mercy from these beasts. No, if I was to meet my end, I would do it as a man, as a ranger, sworn to protect these lands from the horrors that lurked within. I reached the altar and turned to face the woods, leaning heavily against the ancient stone. I could see their eyes in the darkness, glowing with hunger and rage. They emerged from the trees like shadows given form, massive and monstrous, their fangs bared in snarls of anticipation. I had no weapons, no hope of survival, but I had my resolve, my determination to face my fate with dignity and courage. The beasts circled me, their growls rumbling through the night air. I met their gaze, unflinching even as fear coursed through my veins like ice. "Come on then, you bastards," I snarled, my voice raw with pain and defiance. "Come and get me." The largest of the pack, a beast with fur as black as pitch and eyes that glowed like hellfire, stepped forward. It reared up on its hind legs, towering over me, its claws flexing in anticipation of the kill. I braced myself, ready to meet my end, but nothing could have prepared me for the agony that followed. The beast's jaws clamped down on my shoulder, teeth sinking through flesh and muscle, grinding against bone. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat like shards of glass. It shook its massive head, worrying at me like a dog with a bone, and I felt my arm rip free from its socket with a sickening pop. Blood gushed from the ragged stump, painting the altar crimson. But the beast wasn't done. It lunged again, its claws raking across my chest, shredding skin and sinew. I collapsed, my legs no longer able to support me, and the creature pounced, pinning me to the blood-soaked earth. Its jaws closed around my face, teeth puncturing my cheeks, my nose, my brow. I felt my right eye burst under the pressure, hot fluid running down my face. The pain was beyond anything I had ever imagined, a white, hot agony that consumed every nerve, every thought. I could feel the beast's claws sinking into my belly, tearing through muscle and organ alike. My intestines spilled out in glistening coils, steaming in the cool night air. The creature rooted through them, gulping down mouthfuls of my insides, its muzzle stained crimson. I tried to scream, but all that emerged was a wet gurgle, blood bubbling from my lips. My remaining eyes stared up at the night sky, the stars blurring and fading as the life drained from my ruined body. The other beasts closed in, their teeth and claws joining the fray. They tore at my legs, my remaining arm, ripping away chunks of flesh and cracking bones with their powerful jaws. I was reduced to a twitching, bleeding ruin, a feast for the monsters I had sworn to fight. As the darkness closed in, as the agony began to fade into a distant, cold numbness, I saw Bill's face looming over me. But it wasn't the face of the man I had known. It was twisted, distorted, a grotesque mix of human and beast. He grinned, his teeth stained with my blood, and in his eyes I saw a gleeful madness, a savage joy in my suffering. "Welcome to the pack, brother," he growled, his voice a guttural rumble. "Welcome to your new life." And with those words echoing in my ears, with the feel of fangs and claws still tearing at my broken body, I slipped into the abyss, into a darkness deeper and more terrible than any I had ever known. The last thing I felt was my heart, still stubbornly beating in my shattered chest, finally giving out. And then, nothing. Nothing but the void, and the distant, mocking howls of the beasts that had claimed me. In the end, I wasn't a ranger. I wasn't a guardian or a protector. I was just meat, just another meal for the monsters that lurked in the shadows of the forest. And as my consciousness faded, as the last sparks of life guttered out in the ruins of my body, I knew that the woods would never be the same, that the beasts had won, and that all who followed in my footsteps would meet the same grisly fate. For in the heart of the forest, in the shadow of that ancient altar, a new horror had been born, and it would hunger, eternally, for the flesh and blood of the living. The reign of the beasts had begun, and God help any who stood in their way. Story 4. Floorboards creaked under my boots as I crept through the decrepit farmhouse, shotgun raised. The fading light threw twisted shadows across warped walls covered in occult symbols and yellowed newspaper clippings. Another dead end. Another cold trail. But I couldn't give up. Not when my sister's life hung in the balance. My name's Nikki. I grew up in this crappy rural town before the drugs took me. Did a 5-year stint in prison, got clean. I was starting fresh when I got the call. My sister Jenny was missing, and all signs pointed to this place. Grandma's old farmhouse, abandoned since we were kids, since that night. I still have nightmares about it. We were playing hide and seek here while Dad talked to Grandma. I was it, trying to find Jenny. Then the screams started. Terrible, blood-curdling screams that haunt me to this day. Dad and I found Grandma's savaged body later, along with several mutilated deer carcasses arranged in bizarre occult patterns. It was like witchcraft. We left town after her funeral, trying in vain to leave the memories behind. But they followed me, in my dreams and darkest moments. Those screams echoed every time I jabbed a needle in my arm. When I learned Jenny came here looking for Grandma's hidden inheritance, My blood ran cold. It couldn't be a coincidence. Not with her disappearance. So I came armed with shotgun and Zippo, ready to face old ghosts or demons, to find my sister dead or alive. The stench hit my nostrils first. That sickly sweet reek of decay overlaying something earthier, animal-like. It turned my stomach as I swept room to room, shotgun raised. Then I saw it, scrawled on the peeling wallpaper in a crusted reddish brown. A message. I'm waiting downstairs. Come join us. My mouth went dry, but I steeled myself. The wooden basement door gaped open, yawning darkness within. I clicked on my flashlight, revealing splintered steps coated in filth. The fetid stench intensified as I descended, gagging with each breath. I swept my light over crumbling stone walls to a dirt floor and nearly lost my nerve. Mutilated animal carcasses were arranged in a profane altar, just like my nightmares. Deer, possums, rabbits, and inexplicably, a wolf, its fur charred as if burned. And there in the center lay a woman's corpse, flesh ripped, entrails piled around her, like a sacrifice, a warning. It was Jenny. No, I rasped, shotgun dipping. Then I saw her chest rise slightly, still alive. I rushed to her, hands slick with blood as I desperately tried to stop the bleeding. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with agony and terror. She tried to speak but only coughed up blood. Oh God, Jenny, just hold on. I begged. I'll get you out of here. Nikki, she finally choked out, lifting a trembling hand to me, behind. My stomach dropped as I caught a glimpse of yellow eyes in the darkness, heard the scrape of claws on stone. I spun, firing blindly. The shotgun flashed, briefly illuminating the hulking figure rushing me, something not human, moving with predatory grace. Then it was gone. I frantically reloaded, backing toward Jenny. Come on out, you bastard. A bone-chilling roar answered me. Then Grandma lurched into the beam of my flashlight, at least what was left of her. She moved in a bizarre, jerking gait, pupils burning with frenzied hunger. Patches of fur-covered sallow skin hanging off an emaciated frame. Sharp teeth jutted from her sagging jaw. My mind recoiled, unable to accept what I was seeing. Grandma, back from the dead, turned into something unspeakable. No, please. Jenny sobbed behind me. The creature that was once Grandma jerked its head toward my sister, nostrils flaring, hungry. It took a shambling step forward and I snapped out of my shocked paralysis. I pumped round after round into that nightmarish thing wearing Grandma's face, but it barely flinched, bullet holes hissing like water on a hot skillet. My gun clicked empty. Defenseless, I backed away as the monster kept coming. It was almost on me, fetid drool dripping from jagged teeth, when desperation gripped me. The Zippo. I fumbled for it, flicking the flame to life, and the creature recoiled from the meager light, a rumbling growl erupting from its barrel chest. The charred wolf carcass. This thing, whatever it was, feared fire above all else. With a primal bellow I charged forward, driving the Zippo's flame into matted fur. The creature howled as greasy smoke billowed up. It swiped razor claws toward my face, but I didn't stop, relentlessly torching it. The thing I once called Grandma crumpled to the dirt, thrashing and wailing. I emptied my lighter fluid over it, the reek of charred meat filling the cellar. It wasn't human anymore. Wasn't the woman who had bounced me on her knee. This was a monster, a demon, and it had to die. I hurled the sputtering Zippo onto the thing's body. It erupted into flames, writhing in agony, that awful keening cry piercing my skull. At last it lay still, the crackling flames devouring flesh and bone. I swayed there, staring numbly into the inferno, until a feeble cough from Jenny jarred me to action. I rushed to her side. She was white as a corpse, clinging to life by a bare thread. I had to get her out of this hellhole. I lifted her as gently as I could, trying not to see the terrible wounds, trying not to think of what caused them as we limped toward the basement steps. Behind us, the creature's death wails ceased, leaving only the hungry roar of the flames. We left that crypt and its burning demon behind. Later at the hospital, after Jenny was whisked away into emergency surgery, a doctor led me quietly into an empty room. His face was grim as he explained how close she'd been to death's door. He asked me what kind of animal could have done such gruesome damage to her. His clinical words faded to background noise as my gaze fixed on something over his shoulder. The room's lone window looked out on the darkened woods beyond, and there, peering out from the black tree line, were two glowing orbs, feral, hungry, and unmistakably inhuman, watching me. Story 5. The L train clattered overhead as I hurried down the trash-strewn sidewalk, one hand clutching my pepper spray, the other holding my daughter Rosie close. Even at 6 years old, she knew not to dawdle on our walk home from the babysitter. Not in this neighborhood, not after dark. "Mama, I'm hungry," Rosie whined, tugging at my scrubs. "I know, baby. We'll have dinner soon as we get home." I tried to keep the weariness from my voice. It had been another brutal shift in the ER, the usual parade of misery. All I wanted was to collapse on the couch with some microwave leftovers and bad reality TV. But motherhood doesn't come with sick days. We were just turning onto our block when I saw the police lights strobing against the dilapidated brick facades. My stomach clenched. In this part of town, sirens in the night never meant anything good. I picked up my pace, pulse thrumming in my ears as we approached the knot of onlookers and uniformed officers. They were clustered around something in the alley beside our building, something that used to be human. Rosie made a small, frightened noise, pressing her face into my side. I put a hand over her eyes as we edged past the grisly scene. Even with my experience, I had to swallow back a surge of nausea at the brief glimpse of shredded flesh and splintered bone. "Lena? That you?" I turned to see Detective Javier Mendoza shouldering his way through the crowd, his normally jovial face set in grim lines. He was an old friend of my family, had pulled strings to help me get this apartment after Rosie's deadbeat dad split. Seeing him here twisted my stomach into a new set of knots. "Javi, what's going on?" He glanced at the alley, then back at me, something like pity in his dark eyes. "You better come inside. There's something you need to know." "What do you mean Miguel's out?" I asked, setting a mug of instant coffee in front of Javi. Rosie was already asleep in the bedroom. Thank God. This wasn't a conversation I wanted her to overhear. Javi sighed, rubbing a hand over his close-cropped salt and pepper hair. "Got released last week. Some new evidence came to light, cast doubt on his original conviction. District Attorney decided not to retry the case." I slumped back in my chair, mind reeling. My brother Miguel had been serving a 15-year sentence for a string of brutal assaults. The papers had dubbed him the Wolfman for the savage nature of the attacks, the way he seemed to tear his victims apart with his bare hands. "But the body in the alley," I said slowly, horror dawning. "You don't think?" "Forensics is still working the scene. But I've seen a lot of messed up things on this job, and this," Javi shook his head. "It's just like the others, like Miguel's old crimes." I pressed a hand to my mouth, fighting back the urge to scream or vomit or both. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Lena, there's more, Javi said quietly. We found a shoe print at the scene. It's a match for Miguel's prison-issued boots. I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. I kept seeing Miguel's face, not as the wild-eyed monster from his mugshot, but as the protective big brother of our childhood. The one who'd looked out for me, taken beatings from our drunk father so I wouldn't have to. What had happened to that boy to twist him into something so evil? Was it the years in foster care, after our mother died of an overdose? The bad crowds he'd fallen in with as an angry, damaged teen? Or was there some dark seed inside him all along, some flaw in our shared blood, just waiting for the right moment to sprout? I must have drifted off at some point, because I woke to Rosie shaking my shoulder, her face pale and frightened in the gray dawn light. "Mama, there's someone knocking at the door," she whispered. My heart seized in my chest. I grabbed my phone and crept toward the front room, ready to dial 911. But when I peered through the peephole, I let out a shaky breath. It was just Mrs. Nowak, my neighbor from down the hall. I unchained the door and opened it a crack. "Stasia, what's going on?" The elderly, polished woman wrung her hands, her lined face pinched with distress. "Lena, I'm so sorry to wake you, but it's Rosie's babysitter, Carla. She never came home last night. Her mother's been calling me frantic." I didn't know what to tell her. An icy dread seeped through my veins. Carla was a good kid, a responsible kid. She'd never just not show up, not without calling me first. "I have to go," I said abruptly. "Can you watch Rosie for me? Please." Mrs. Nowak blinked, taken aback by my intensity. "Of course, dear. But where are you going?" I was already throwing on a coat over my scrubs, shoving my feet into shoes. "To get some answers." The stench of rancid meat hit me as soon as I entered the alley behind Carla's building. I gagged, pressing my sleeve over my nose and mouth. Javi had said Miguel's old crime scenes were a slaughterhouse, but I'd never really understood what that meant. Until now. Shaking, I pulled out the UV light I used to check for counterfeit bills at the hospital. The purple beam played over the blood-spattered walls, the rusty dumpster, the cracked concrete. There, caught on a loose nail, a tuft of coarse, dark hair. Just like the kind they'd found on Miguel's previous victims. I bagged it with a trembling hand, fighting the urge to run, to scream, to break down sobbing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. My brother couldn't be responsible for this carnage. He couldn't. A soft footfall behind me, the crunch of broken glass under a boot heel. I spun, heart in my throat, hands scrabbling for the mace in my pocket. "Hey, little sister." Miguel stepped from the shadows, a sad smile on his haggard face. He looked older, thinner, his once vibrant eyes dulled by years behind bars. But it was him, my brother. "Miggy," I choked out. What did you do?" He spread his hands in a helpless gesture. "Nothing I could control, Lena. It's in my blood. Our blood." I shook my head frantically, refusing to understand. "No, you're sick, Miggy. You need help. Treatment. You can't." "Can't what?" he asked softly. "Can't be a monster?" "Oh, but I can. And so can you." He took a step toward me. I stumbled back, mace canister shaking in my grip. "Stay away from me." "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, still in that terribly gentle voice. "I could never hurt you, Hermanita. Don't you see? I did this for you. For us. So you'll finally understand what we are." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my back pressed against the cold brick wall. "Trapped." Miguel's smile widened. In the amber light of the rising moon, I saw his teeth lengthen into jagged fangs, heard the pop and crack of reshaping bones as his features contorted into something inhuman. "No," I whispered, bile rising in my throat. "Oh God, no." Coarse fur erupted from his skin as his body hunched over, limbs twisting grotesquely. His clothes shredded as his frame expanded, muscles rippling beneath a new pelt. Within moments, the man I'd known as my brother was gone, replaced by a nightmare fusion of human and wolf. The werewolf let out a low, rumbling growl, lips peeling back over a muzzle full of dripping fangs. Its glowing amber eyes bored into me, full of feral hunger and something worse, a cold, alien intelligence. I raised the mace canister with shaking hands, thumbing off the safety. "Stay back. I swear to God, I'll spray you." It took a lumbering step forward, claws gouging the pavement. I screamed and unleashed the burning stream of capsaicin into its eyes. The werewolf recoiled with a pained snarl, shaking its massive head. But it didn't flee. If anything, the mace seemed to enrage it further. Before I could move, it pounced. I went down hard, the back of my head cracking against the alley floor. My vision swam as the creature's weight bore down on me, its fetid breath hot on my face. Powerful jaws clamped around my forearm. I shrieked as teeth punched through skin and muscle, the sound of my own bones crunching lost in the roar of agony. I could feel its rough tongue rasping against the torn flesh as it tasted my blood. With my good hand, I scrabbled desperately for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a jagged shard of broken glass. Without hesitation, I rammed it into the werewolf's eye. It reared back, howling in pain and fury. I used its moment of distraction to squirm out from under it, clutching my mangled arm to my chest. Already, I could feel the fever burning in the wound, an unnatural heat spreading through my veins. The werewolf turned its remaining baleful eye on me, a thick gobbet of vitreous humor and blood dripping from its ruined socket. Slowly, horribly, the damage began to knit itself back together, new flesh and bone writhing into place. "You see?" It rasped in a voice I knew, a voice I'd loved since childhood. "We can't be stopped, Hermana. We can't be killed. This is our curse, our destiny." It started toward me again, an unhurried, implacable advance. I tried to push myself backwards, to get up and run, but white-hot agony lanced through my arm with every movement. "No," I sobbed, tears of despair and terror mingling with the blood on my face. "Please, Miggy, don't do this." The werewolf didn't respond. It simply kept coming, claws clicking on the pavement with each inexorable step. I was going to die here, I realized, torn apart and devoured by the very same darkness that lived in my own flesh and blood. And then, God help me, I would rise again as well, a new monster to visit horrors upon the innocent. The werewolf loomed over me, its shadow eclipsing the pale moonlight. As it reared back, I closed my eyes and thought of Rosie, my sweet baby girl, who would grow up an orphan because of the evil her mother had failed to escape. "I'm so sorry," I thought as the creature's jaws opened wide. "So sorry." The sound of a gunshot split the night, loud as a thunderclap in the enclosed space. I flinched, eyes flying open to see the werewolf stagger, a crimson blossom spreading across its heaving flank. "Get away from her, you son of a bitch." Javi stood at the mouth of the alley, service weapon leveled and face set in a rictus of grim determination. As the werewolf turned toward this new threat, he put 2 more rounds into its chest in quick succession. With an enraged howl, the creature charged. Javi backpedaled, squeezing off shot after shot, but the werewolf just wouldn't go down, shrugging off the gunfire like it was no more than bee stings. It slammed into Javi, all slashing claws and snapping jaws. The detective went down hard, his weapon skittering away into the shadows. I could only watch, paralyzed, as it tore him apart with feral glee, shredding flesh from bone in a crimson spray. When it was done, the werewolf rose on its haunches, muzzle matted with Javi's blood. It fixed its remaining eye on me, and I saw the last shreds of my brother's humanity finally extinguished behind that soulless gaze. It padded back toward me, each step slow and deliberate. I tried to crawl away, to put up any defense at all, but I was too weak from blood loss and shock. As it towered over me once more, I knew there would be no more delays, no more reprieves. I was the last thing standing between it and the night, and I wouldn't be standing much longer. The werewolf reared back, jaws agape to deliver the killing bite. In that final moment, a strange calm came over me. Maybe this was better, I thought. Better to die here, quickly, than to become the same kind of unholy abomination. I closed my eyes and waited for oblivion's cold embrace. Story 6. The silence was suffocating, pressing down on me like a physical weight as I trekked through the undergrowth. Even the usual chirping of birds and rustling of small animals in the brush were absent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I'd been a ranger in this park for over a decade, but I'd never experienced anything like the eerie stillness that had settled over this remote corner of the wilderness. It set my teeth on edge, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The reports had started coming in a week ago. Hikers found dead, their chests torn open, their hearts ripped out with surgical precision. And the symbols carved into the surrounding trees, I didn't recognize them, but they made my skin crawl. They spoke of something ancient, something dark and hungry. I'd volunteered to investigate, against the advice of my superiors. They thought it was a bear, or maybe a particularly vicious mountain lion. But I knew better. I'd seen the photos of the victims, seen the unnatural angles of the claw marks. This was something else, something that didn't belong in this world. As I pushed deeper into the forest, following the trail of disturbing signs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows seemed to flicker and dance at the edges of my vision, as if something was moving just beyond my line of sight. I found the first body a mile in. What was left of it, anyway? It had been savaged, torn limb from limb, its entrails strewn across the forest floor like some kind of macabre decoration. And the heart was gone, just like the others. I knelt down, examining the wounds. They were clean, precise. No ragged edges, no signs of a struggle. Whatever had done this had been fast. Inhumanly fast. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled, my hand going to the gun at my hip. But there was nothing there, just the trees and the oppressive, watchful silence. I stood, slowly, every nerve in my body screaming danger. And then I saw it. A shadow darker than the others, detaching itself from the base of a large oak. It moved, slinking low to the ground, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of glowing, predatory eyes. I drew my gun, my heart pounding in my throat. "Show yourself," I yelled, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vastness of the forest. A low, guttural growl was my only answer. And then the shadow was moving, circling me, darting from tree to tree with a speed and agility that was terrifying to behold. I fired, the gunshot shattering the silence like a thunderclap. But the shadow didn't even flinch, didn't slow down. It was toying with me, I realized, playing with its food. I turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth in a blind panic. Branches whipped at my face, roots tried to trip me, but I barely felt them. All I could feel was the overwhelming, mind-numbing terror, the certainty that I was going to die out here, alone and far from help. I burst into a clearing and stumbled to a halt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Before me, the ground opened up into a yawning chasm, a dark, jagged wound in the earth, and at the edge of that chasm, carved into the stone as if by a giant claw, was a symbol. The same symbol I'd seen on the trees around the bodies. A growl behind me. I spun, and there it was, rising up from the shadows like a nightmare given form. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall, with a muscular, almost human-like body covered in shaggy, matted fur. Its face was a twisted mix of wolf and man, with a long, tooth-filled snout and eyes that glowed with a malevolent intelligence. I raised my gun, my hands shaking so badly I could barely aim. The creature cocked its head, almost as if it was amused by my pathetic show of defiance. Then it lunged, moving with a speed that defied belief. I fired, again and again, but the bullet seemed to have no effect. It slammed into me, sending me flying back, my gun clattering away into the darkness. I hit the ground hard, the breath driven from my lungs. The creature was on me in an instant, its claws digging into my shoulders, pinning me down. Its jaws opened wide, revealing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth, each as long as my finger. It lowered its head, its hot, fetid breath washing over my face. I could smell the stench of decay, of rotting meat and old blood. I gagged, trying to turn my head away, but its grip was implacable. And then, with a snarl of savage glee, it bit down. Pain exploded through my body as its teeth sank into my shoulder, grinding against bone. I screamed, the sound ripped from my throat like a living thing. I could feel my flesh tearing, my blood gushing out in hot, pulsing spurts. The creature shook its head, worrying at me like a dog with a bone. I felt my shoulder dislocate, the joint popping out of its socket with a sickening crunch. But that was just the beginning. It released my shoulder, only to sink its teeth into my arm, just below the elbow. With a wrench of its powerful neck, it tore my forearm free, the bones snapping like twigs. I howled, the pain beyond anything I had ever imagined. It tossed my severed arm aside, the limb flopping grotesquely on the blood-soaked ground. Then it went for my other arm, its teeth shearing through muscle and sinew, separating flesh from bone with sickening ease. I was beyond screaming now, my voice reduced to a thin, reedy whimper. I could feel my life draining away, flowing out of me in crimson rivers. The creature's muzzle was stained red, its eyes alight with a frenzied, insatiable hunger. It reared back, its claws sinking into my belly. With one brutal yank, it opened me up from sternum to groin, my intestines spilling out in glistening, steaming coils. It plunged its head into my abdominal cavity, worrying out organs, gulping them down with wet, slurping noises. I watched, my vision beginning to fade, as it tore my liver free, as it gnawed on my kidneys. I felt a strange, distant sense of relief when it finally found my heart, still stubbornly beating in my shattered chest. It ripped the pulsing organ free, holding it aloft for a moment as if in triumph. Then, with a final, vicious snarl, it bit down, its teeth piercing the tough muscle, sending a geyser of blood spraying across its fur. As the last of my life drained away, as the darkness closed in, I saw it turn its head, those glowing, hellish eyes fixing on me. There was something like satisfaction in its gaze, a cruel, savage joy. It had won. It had claimed another heart, another life. And as my vision faded to black, as the agony finally, mercifully began to recede, I knew that it wouldn't be the last. The creature would hunt again. It would kill again. And the forest would run red with blood, an endless feast for the insatiable beast that lurked in the shadows. My last thought, as the void claimed me, was a prayer, a desperate, futile plea to whatever gods might be listening. Story 7. Floorboards creaked under my boots as I crept through the abandoned church, flashlight beam dancing nervously across dusty pews. The empty eye sockets of a rat corpse glared at me, making my skin crawl. Or maybe it was this place itself that set my teeth on edge. I squeezed my amulet tight, focusing on the familiar ridges of the silver pentagram digging into my palm. It grounded me, pulling me back from the abyss I could feel yawning at my feet. I didn't want to be here. The ruined church held only pain and darkness for me now. But when my sister Amy had vanished 2 nights ago, I knew where she must have gone. Only an addict seeking the ultimate high would come to this cursed place. And if she had crossed paths with what lurked below. I swept my light over the crumbling stone walls, seeking the entrance to the tunnels I had stumbled into 5 years ago, high out of my mind. The tunnels I barely escaped from, with their strange runes etched in blood and fragments of gnawed human bone. There, behind the defaced statue of the angel, a gaping hole breathed icy air redolent of wet stone and decay. I took a deep breath, fighting back unwelcome memories, no choice but to descend again into nightmare. The flashlight revealed a cramped passage sloping precariously downward into the dark. I followed the fading scent of Amy's perfume, praying I wasn't too late, praying she hadn't found what I once had in a blacked-out stupor. The runes awaited 20 yards in, glowing with a faint luminosity that turned my gut to water. I averted my gaze from the pulsing shapes and symbols as the passage opened into a vast chamber. Bones crunched under my feet. Human bones, cracked and sucked dry of marrow. Monstrous claws had scraped runes into the walls here as well, the shapes seeming to twist and warp as I passed them. There were words, too, etched raggedly into the stone with what looked like fingernails worn to the quick. We are legion. The hunger grows. And finally, pulsing like a vein about to burst. God has abandoned us. Bile burned my throat. No God had power in this place. Only writhing, ravenous evil that wore human skins like tattered cloaks. Even the amulet felt cold and dead against my chest now. I swept my light over moldering wooden beams along the ceiling. And there, dangling from a rope of glistening viscera, swayed my sister's mutilated corpse. Her face frozen in a final rictus of agony and terror, eyes plucked by greedy claws. The flashlight slipped from my nerveless fingers, falling end over end, until it illuminated a hunched figure crouched in the corner. It turned, eyes burning red in the gloom. Eyes I knew from childhood and blood-soaked nightmares. "Grandma?" I whispered. Black lips peeled back from jagged fangs in a mockery of a grin. She rose on digitigrade legs, viscous fluid dripping from elongated claws. My grandmother, or what was left of her humanity. She stalked toward me, a low rumble building in her barrel chest. A werewolf's growl. I scrabbled backwards, bile burning my throat, fumbling desperately for my amulet. But it was gone, the chain severed by a casual swipe of her claws moments before. She towered over me now on 2 legs, exuding the stench of the grave. I gazed up at the horror my grandmother had become, knowing I was doomed. Her claws grasped my shoulders gently, almost affectionately. Then her jaws stretched wide, strings of saliva glistening in the dim light. She buried her muzzle in my stomach as I screamed and screamed, ripping me open in a welter of blood. I was still faintly screaming as she buried her face in my entrails, making low sounds of satisfaction. My life pumped out sluggishly onto cold stone to mingle with Amy's as the world faded. The last thing I felt before darkness claimed me was Grandma reverently smearing my blood across her muzzle, a perverse blessing. Then, nothing. Until I woke up. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back: the church, the tunnels, Amy, Grandma. I bolted upright, hands flying to my stomach. But there was no gaping wound, no spilled entrails, just smooth, unbroken skin. What the hell? I muttered, looking around in confusion. I was back in the church proper, lying on a dusty pew. Moonlight filtered through broken stained glass windows, casting eerie patterns across the floor. Had it all been a nightmare? Some drug-induced hallucination? But no, there was the statue of the angel, its face still grotesquely defaced. And behind it, the yawning entrance to the tunnels. I stumbled to my feet, swaying as a wave of dizziness washed over me. My hand went to my chest, seeking the familiar comfort of my amulet. It was there, cool silver nestled against my skin. What was going on? A soft sound from the tunnels made me freeze. Footsteps, drawing closer. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to flee this cursed place and never look back. But I couldn't move, rooted to the spot as the footsteps grew louder. A figure emerged from the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. It was me. Or rather, it looked like me, same face, same clothes. But the eyes were all wrong. Glowing with an unholy red light, filled with ancient hunger. The thing wearing my face smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Welcome back," it said. My voice twisted into something inhuman. "We've been waiting for you." Behind it, more shapes stirred in the shadows. Familiar faces, Amy, Grandma, others I had known and lost. All wearing the same hungry smile, eyes burning with infernal light. I stumbled backwards, a scream building in my throat. But there was nowhere to run. As the creatures closed in, I realized the terrible truth. I hadn't escaped 5 years ago. I had never left. And now I never would. Story 8. I checked my watch for the 10th time as the elevator crept upward. I was running late for my big interview with Weston Kane, billionaire playboy, young entrepreneur, and prime suspect in a series of strange disappearances. This story could make my career. So what if Kane's glitzy penthouse gave me the creeps? A good journalist can't be afraid of luxury. Still, I felt a chill run down my spine as the doors slid open with a soft chime. "Mr. Collins, so glad you could make it." Kane flashed a grin too perfect to be real as he welcomed me inside. "Drink?" I politely refused as I set up my recorder, glancing around the apartment. Everything about the place, from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city to the modern art on the walls, screamed money. The kind of money that could make inconvenient problems go away. "Let's get right to it, shall we?" I tried to sound confident. "Your name keeps coming up in my investigation into the disappearances of several tenants. Tell me, do you have anything to do with?" A blood-curdling scream cut me off. Kane rose swiftly, glancing at his watch with a frown. "Apologies, Mr. Collins. I'm afraid we need to cut this interview short." Before I could react, he yanked me from my seat and hustled me toward the elevator. "Time to go. I'll have my secretary reschedule." "Now wait just a damn minute." I shoved back as the doors slid open. "I'm not finished asking my..." My protest died on my lips. The elevator car was drenched in blood. Crimson splatters painted the mirrors and dripped down the walls. In the center lay a mutilated body barely recognizable as human. "Oh dear." Kane seethed behind me. "How unpleasant." I spun to face him, heart seizing in my chest. What the hell is going on here? Kane glanced past me into the elevator, scowling. It would seem my condition is less controlled tonight. Apologies. I staggered back. Your condition? He flashed an icy, terrifying smile. You wanted a scoop, Collins? Well, here it is. Werewolves are real, and you happened to visit on the first night of the full moon. My mind revolted at the reality confronting my eyes. This had to be some kind of twisted prank. Monsters weren't real. None of this could be real. Kane rolled his neck, tendons cracking. We have maybe 10 minutes before I turn. So I suggest you run. Nails lengthened into claws with a sickening snap. Blind panic flooded my brain. I bolted down the hall, Kane's laughter chasing my heels. Behind me came the terrible sound of bones breaking, reshaping, of something inhuman forcing its way out. I raced for the emergency stairwell, breath burning in my lungs. Had to get outside. Had to get help. This would still make my career, I feverishly told myself, if I could just make it out alive. A blood-freezing howl reverberated down the hallway. The stairwell door was in sight. Just a few more feet, and I'd be safe. I risked a glance back. A hulking, wolf-like shape filled the corridor, barreling toward me on all fours. Glowing eyes met mine, promising murder. I screamed, slamming through the door into the stairwell. The creature followed, claws gouging the metal frame as it forced itself through. I descended the stairs 2 at a time, praying the monster was too large to fit. Its enraged roars told me otherwise. The stairwell trembled under the weight of its pursuit. I grasped the handrail, half falling down each flight, half to make it outside, half to. A claw sliced through the door above me like tin foil, spearing my shoulder. I howled as it lifted me like a rag doll, pulling me back through the mangled entrance. I dangled before the werewolf's slavering jaws, gripped in one massively clawed hand. It studied me with hungry intelligence, savoring my terror. I could smell the reek of blood and rotten meat on its breath. Those glowing eyes held no trace of humanity, only feral bloodlust. Please, I whimpered, hating the pathetic quaver in my voice. Don't. The werewolf's lips peeled back in what might have been a grin. Then it slammed me against the wall, driving the air from my lungs. I felt ribs crack under the impact. It leaned in close, rank breath washing over my face. Inhuman eyes bored into mine as a long, purple tongue slithered out to lap at the blood oozing from my shoulder. I shuddered in revulsion and agony. Kane, please. I tried again. You don't have to do this. You're still human, somewhere in there. You can fight it. A snarl was my only response. The tongue rasped over my cheek, tasting my fear. I screwed my eyes shut, waiting for the killing blow. But it never came. The creature abruptly released me, letting me crumple to the floor. I looked up through a haze of pain to see it studying its own clawed hand with something like confusion. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of humanity in those hellish eyes. A spark of the man Kane used to be, fighting against the beast within. Then it was gone, replaced by pure animal fury. The werewolf threw back its head and howled, the sound reverberating through the building like a demonic choir. I used its momentary distraction to drag myself toward the elevator. If I could just make it inside, hit the button for the lobby. Claws seized my ankle, yanking me back. I screamed as I was lifted upside down, dangling before the werewolf's maw once more. It snarled, spit flying from its jowls to spatter my face. This was it, then. This was how I died. Not for a story, not for fame or glory. but as a forgotten meal for a monster wearing a man's skin. I sent up a desperate prayer as the werewolf's jaws opened wide. Let it be quick. Let the pain end. The creature lunged. I felt its teeth sink into my gut, worrying and tearing. Utter agony exploded through my nerves. I shrieked until my voice gave out, thrashing weakly in its grip. The last thing I saw before blessed darkness claimed me was the werewolf's face, muzzle painted with my blood. Its eyes gleamed with savage triumph as it feasted on my entrails. My final thought before slipping into that eternal void was one of grim satisfaction. At least I'd gotten my scoop, in the end. Too bad I wouldn't be around to write it. The Werewolf of the Kane Building. It would make one hell of a headline.